Okay, I think it's fair to say we can get started. We have 20 participants so far, and latecomers will catch up with us. I have no doubt about that. So I would like to start by welcoming you all to our yearly organic webinar, second edition after last year's first edition, which happened into the first lockdown of COVID here in Europe and for here in Belgium and for the most of Europe. I'd also like to wish you a happy World Chocolate Day. It's not World Coffee Day, but it's World Chocolate Day. So have yourself a little piece of chocolate, organic preferably. Sit back and enjoy the 20-25 minutes that this webinar will be lasting. We'd very much like to encourage you to ask questions at the end. I think it's very important as a community of suppliers, roasters, customers. We share the same ideas. We're all here for the same reasons, to understand better and better year after year the trends in organic coffee. It's very important that we build an exchange from this, and that this is not just a one-way presentation from Supremo to you, but also a platform for exchange. So please shoot your questions as the webinar unfolds. Don't wait for the end. If we have too many questions, we will select a few only, but we'll get back to every participant who have questions later on by email. But the aim really is to build an interactive session of questions and answers at the end of this. You can post your questions in the Q&A sections of this webinar. I will not specifically name participants. I will just read out loud the chosen questions and provide my best possible answer to it. All right, that was for a bit of housekeeping. Now that that is said, let's look at the summary. We'll be talking this year about organic origin and destination trends. So we've purposely not called this a supply and demand webinar. Why? For the simple reason that it's extremely difficult to obtain detailed data and information on organic coffee production, exports, imports, and consumption. So we've very much preferred to take an approach of calling this trends rather than supply and demand. All right, we'll start by taking a look at origins, differentials over the years to set the context in the picture. We will then look at a holistic set of information, which will combine volume, supply, so-called, risks, and price. In the scope of that section of the webinar, we'll approach a few different origins. We will then talk about new kids on the block, like we like to call them, a few origins popping up on the organic coffee scene, and a few origins who are expected to increase their production in the coming years. And we'll end that first section by talking about a potential crunch coming towards us in the very near future. After which we will be looking at destinations. Consumer trends in the global and the EU market, to the best of our knowledge and our ability to fact find. Once again, we don't always have easy access to such data and information. So if any of you or dear customers watching us today have better information or complementary information to what we will be exposing in the coming minutes, please absolutely feel free to reach out and we can exchange further on the topic. And we will end by talking about roaster conversion to organic coffee. All right. And then close on a set of questions and answers where, once again, your participation is very much appreciated. So let's jump into it. Differentials over the years. Purposely here, we are not including fair trade organic differentials. Why is that? It's because fair trade and fair trade organic coffees respond to a price mechanism structure that is quite fixed, quite set. And we nonetheless think that this will be evolving, especially with current hikes in the market. We must expect FT and FTO coffees to be priced more and more on differential basis. But for the time being, still believe that given the set price structure, it's not worth looking at in detail, just perhaps worth keeping in mind, excuse me, perhaps worth keeping in mind that in any origin where there is FD and FTO coffees being offered, this tends to bring up the price point of all other organics produced in the origin. All right. That being said, we can look at popular combinations from popular origins. So if we look at the organic RFA, which until recently would have been called more organic UTZ, combination of coffees available. And if we look at Honduras, we see a very important hike since 2019. This hike is partly due to an increase in demand, very selective demand, an increase in demand. And why selective? It's because more and more demand for Honduras preparations have been accompanied by the requirements to have glyphosate-free coffee. Exporters, shippers, co-ops, producer groups in Honduras have coped fairly well with that new requirement, recent requirement, and have been very wise in their way of managing that risk. So the rejection risk, the replacement risk, but that is what partly explains the hike in differential over the past 18 to 24 months from that origin. On the red line underneath, the SHG and also HG, because they're pretty much combined nowadays, on the red line underneath, you see the 150 defect coffees from Honduras, also quite stable in the past few years, but still worth noting that they are nowadays trading in the double-digit category. That was for Honduras, a first look at Honduras. If we look at another origin very similar in terms of filler coffees, but also in terms of importance it represents for the EU consumption market, we head towards Peru and we look at Peru grade 1. I'll take a sip of water as you observe the chart. Looking at Peru grade 1, we also see a slight increase there in the differentials offered since the same period, pretty much, which is also partly linked to the new requirements on glyphosate control, glyphosate testing. So there is that same very direct responsiveness from producer groups and shippers to the topic of glyphosate. But there is also another trend, which we'll be talking about a bit later in this webinar, coming out of Peru specifically, and that is the fact that sellers are somehow shying away from selling to the European Union clients. We see more and more sellers either hiking up the prices the minute they know that the demand is coming from Europe, or simply refusing to offer. All right. And on the same note as for Honduras, you see the undergrades trading there at a very stable level. Remaining, let's stay on organic RFA coffees, but let's head towards East Africa. Looking at two different coffees there, we have the Congo K4 and the Uganda Bugishu, which have also been enjoying price increases lately, perhaps with the exception of Congo K4, that remains quite stable. You see a hike there in the course of 2018 exercise, which was purely due to an increase in demand, a sudden increase in demand. So a few new buyers realizing suddenly that Congo is good value for money and appearing in the market. That has had a temporary price increase effect on that specific coffee, which has then stabilized since. If you look at the red line where they're talking about Uganda, a semi-washed Bugishu coffee, which has had absolutely no change in pricing due to any specific glyphosate risk, but you see a massive hike since the second half of last year there. That is purely due to a terrible crop, which the Arabica producing regions of Uganda have been going through, a complete squeeze on, on availability of organic coffees. And that explains, that is explained partly by what one could call the trauma the exporters have been suffering there, having to short cover in very difficult situations. So a very strong price increase there for Uganda organic RFA coffees, which is still reflected nowadays in the way shippers offer the coming crops. Nonetheless, we expect it to not remain a trend per se and to revert back to perhaps the +30 levels. Leaving aside combination certifications, organic RFA, looking at single certified organic coffees and looking at two fillers, We have, again, Peru and Honduras, similar qualities, one would say so. And one might also say that for single certified organic coffee, this looks quite expensive. Nonetheless, if you put yourself in the shoes of a producer or a seller, excuse me for that, you would rather be selling a combination of certifications and increase your margins than to be forced into selling a single organic coffee. If you've gone through the effort of obtaining different certifications, you perhaps want to reward that at the time of selling your coffee. So single organic coffee is not that expensive if you keep that in mind. We've looked at the differentials, put things into the context a little bit. I hope I can get rid of that upper part of my screen popping up. I'm not sure. We'll leave it like that. So having looked at differentials, prices, let's now look at a holistic approach that will take us through the combination of volumes, supply, risk, been saying the word glyphosate quite a lot already in this webinar, and prices. So if you look at supply and you look at the upper table here, purposely leaving aside Ethiopia, which is a big producer, leaving them aside because in terms of obtaining clear production figures, it's a mission impossible. It's what an Ethiopian shipper recently told me was a black box in terms of obtaining information. Nonetheless, you can estimate it's roughly 1.2 to 1.5 million bags for the fact of not having a validated figure on that. I did not include it in this table, but you see there four origins, Peru, Honduras, Mexico, and Uganda, where you have a pretty much verified production figure, and you have an origin passing rate, followed by Supremo's passing rate and an extrapolation. So the origin passing rate is a percentage that Supremo obtained in 2018, 2019 by doing a massive series of testing for glyphosate on coffees from those origins, from various supply chains within those origins. Supremo suppliers and non-suppliers. We've been doing the same exercise, repeat of this exercise this year solely on our supply chains, and that's why you see a differentiation between the column origin passing rate and Supremo passing rate. Basically, passing rate being coffees that are guaranteed to not have any glyphosate in them. All right, so extrapolating the number of the organic production and applying the passing rate will give you a safe production quantity, a safe supply of organic coffee from each and every of those origins. If you apply that to what is our estimate of the world organic production, 7.2 million bags, it means you're applying 62% passing rate to 7.2 million bags. You actually have a production worldwide, which is glyphosate free of 4.4 million bags. All right, might sound alarming like that. If you look at it purely from an S&D perspective, you still have 7.2 million bags of coffee. That's a no-brainer. But not all of them are actually glyphosate-free coffees based on studies and experiments we have been leading for the past 3 years. That said, we have somehow tried to visualize this supply. On a scale of 1 to 10, you'll see on the lower part of the screen, different origins. The blue line, excuse me, excessive coughing today. The blue line will represent the potential access to a volume from any given origin for a consumer, for a coffee roaster. It doesn't mean it's a certain amount of millions of bags or not. It just shows on a scale of 1 to 10 how an origin or another is capable of supply. So you see there good availability from 4 specific origins, Mexico, Peru, Honduras, and Ethiopia, and lower availabilities from others. All right, we'll continue with the same approach of having that sort of target and scale of 0 to 10, and we'll do it now for the risk. So I was telling you a few minutes ago that in 2018, we assessed different origins, different supply chains in origins, and we try to rank their risk factor vis-à-vis the glyphosate issue. That was done via broad testing, but also through a comprehensive survey sent to suppliers and non-suppliers in those different origins. Survey that related to everything starting from farm to arrival in warehouse in Europe. So absolutely all aspects of the supply chain. The results combined gave us a risk factor, which is represented, well, first of all, which is clearly pictured on the podium up there. We somehow knew before doing the exercise that some East African origins would perform well. We expected some others to perform less well, but the podium up there shows you a clear trend with Rwanda, Congo, and Ethiopia showing very low risk factor. Honduras, Nicaragua, and Peru, medium risk factor. Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia, high risk factor. Okay, this is absolutely not to alarm, but once again, to be aware of a certain reality out there. Scaling on a 0 to 10, this time with a red line, the closer you are to 0, obviously, the lower your risk is. Okay. Price, we discussed differentials earlier. We're now here adding the same other origins that you've seen on the supply and the risk circles. This all makes sense when it comes together. So it's when this comes all together, supply, risk, and price, that we can obtain the most information out of it. What you basically want to be doing is to have the blue line as close to 10 as possible, and both the price and the risk, obviously, as close to 0 as possible. So, for example, and I hope you can see my mouse when I do this, but an origin like Honduras or Peru, with a wide gap between your price risk and your volume available, is somehow a safe bet. It's a wise choice. An origin where you have plenty of volume like Mexico, but a high risk, is attention to be kept on, obviously. East African origins, where you have most often high prices, Ethiopia and Rwanda, but then very different supply cases. You'll have a high price tag in Rwanda, very little coffee to choose from, plenty of coffee in Ethiopia, alongside also a rather high price tag. The others are rather in average when you look at this combination of supply, risk, and price. All right, hopefully that sheds a bit of light on our approach, which is always taking into consideration all aspects of organic coffee transactions. We've discussed differentials. We've looked at the holistic triangulation with those colorful lines. Let's now talk about new kids on the block. New kids on the block, China. It might sound as nuts as it might sound. China has actually started producing organic coffee. So this is something quite new. We have, starting next year, access to a beginning volume of about 20 containers of Simao grade 1 coffee. The pictures you see on the postcard on this slide are actually from organic farms in China. Will that become big volumes? Time will tell. The partners behind this initiative have ambitions, understand the issue of organic integrity quite well, and are looking for market. So believers, first believers are welcome to join us potentially if we can make a clip happen. We are still at our level at Supremo trying to discover a bit more everything this entails. Nonetheless, would China start producing a lot of organic coffee? This could be an interesting option to look into for roasters in the European market. Kenya is there. Obviously, Kenya, the big challenge is the price point. That's a secret to no one. Will it become a niche organic production? As of today, it doesn't even export more than 10 containers per annum. There is a organic conversion program going on, led by the Danish government, and we have been offered to have a first option to look at the coffee once it will be fully certified, once the farmers will have been converted. That is something we're always happy to also share with our friends in the industry. It could make sense for some of us to look at such a coffee with an organic label. Aside from new kids on the block, because obviously it's not China and Kenya who are going to give us the volume we'll be looking for in the coming few years. Which origins do we expect to see growth from? So those namely would be Peru. Peru has recently taken very strong political decisions before the presidential elections, which are still a bit of a mess, but has taken that ambitious goal of developing organic farming, multi-crops, but of course coffee being of high importance, as a way to generate more income for populations around the country. So we expect there roughly 500,000 bags in the coming 6-7 years out of Peru. We are tempted to say we expect the same increase in volume from Honduras, but there's a big condition there, is that production costs do not hike. We would have had this webinar exactly on this topic exactly a year ago. The market was at 105. So obviously the hike has since relieved a lot the pressure on Honduran coffee farmers when it comes to covering the production costs, but there's still a potential to go back to levels where producers will not be finding any sense in maintaining labor-intensive organic plantations when their costs are not covered. We added there as well Bolivia. Bolivia is a very small origin. It used to produce much more in the past, but it has, amidst a small production, it has almost tripled its capacity, its production volumes in the past 2 years. So that's a sign. That's a sign that there might be growth there one day. Something to keep in mind. Brazil, surprisingly, Brazil. You wouldn't think about organic when you think about Brazil, but actually this year, Brazil in the coming crop will be producing 120,000 bags of organic coffee, mostly of a very good cup preparation, mostly going to gourmet and specialty buyers. Nonetheless, approaching it very much from a business point of view, like everything the Brazilians do. It's very much always with a business focus in mind, no romance there, but proper execution definitely. So if you look at Brazil and you talk about the standard quality they produce right now organically, you're talking about 20% yields less than non-organic, but you're talking about asking plus 130, plus 140 for a coffee that or else would trade at -10. So the maths are quickly done for our Brazilian friends. And then Congo, dear to our hearts, growing there, but very much an origin that you have to monitor and go along with step by step. So we've pretty much, covered new kids on the block. Is there a supply crunch coming? It's not really a question, there is one. There is one coming for the following reasons. And it will, so to speak, will get worse before it gets better, all right? I'm gonna explain to you why that's what we believe right now. So there's a supply crunch coming because of COVID effects on audits. And I had pretty much promised myself to not talk too much about COVID in this webinar, but certain facts are unavoidable. COVID has stopped audits from taking place, has forced audits to happen remotely, based purely on paperwork. And in cases like that, increase in yields are not easily permitted. So an increase in yield is when a farmer or a farmer group will say, well, this year I have more coffee, or I expect more coffee next year. So you can actually grant me the right to produce more organic coffee. So because auditors could not verify that fact easily, increase in yields were not permitted. That means even in origins where it is a fact, there will be more organic coffee, and that will be the case in some origins. Farmers will not be allowed to sell it as organic because the audits that they will have all succeeded by now will not have granted them the right to increase their farm yields, and therefore, as a direct consequence, their right to sell more organic coffee. So that's one of the reasons why. Another impact of COVID has been the fact that in some origins, farms have not been very well taken care of. That's particularly the case of Peru, where we do know that farmers tend to have various parcels, not always far from each other, but travel restrictions within the same districts and throughout districts in different countries have not been allowed for a certain amount of time. So farmers simply have not been able to travel to their second or their third parcel, or their main parcel if that's not where their household is also, and have not been able to maintain those farms organically, meaning in a labor-intensive way, where a lot of farm maintenance, pruning, weeding, etc., is done manually and not mechanically. So what did they do when finally the gates reopened and they could travel to their plots of land? Well, tempting to use non-organic solutions to make up for the time they could not spend on their farms earlier. We have heard about decertifications due to that. Quantifying the impact on supply is not possible, but we know there will be an impact. I mentioned earlier, did I? Well, whether I did or not, I'll mention it again. EU versus USA maximum residue limits, MRL, is an abbreviation that's becoming more and more popular to all of us in the industry. Producers in certain countries, I did mention it. Great, there you go. I've not lost all my memory. Producers in certain countries are actually shying away, refusing to sell to the EU, or doing it very reluctantly, only to loyal buyers over the years, because US buyers are simply more relaxed because they don't have to follow the same glyphosate MRL regulation than we do in the EU. That's a reality. All right. Will the USDA have a change of mind, a strategy to reduce that MRL in the future that will have a reverse impact the other way around? Today, it's not the case. So we just have to understand that we are there competing with another consumption market that has softer requirements when it comes to organic coffees. Doesn't mean our requirements in the EU are not good, just means that that's what we're competing from. And from a farmer's perspective, there's the easy option, there's the more demanding option vis-a-vis glyphosate. Choose which one you want to sell to. All right, then I did mention earlier as well, cost of production versus income. In the case of Honduras, when we were talking about increase of volume expected in the coming years, still an issue that is there year after year. Despite a more comfortable market right now for producers, it's still a long-lasting issue. And well, again, Peru and Honduras combined together, representing 60+% of the imports in the EU. And I've already said their challenges vis-a-vis the EU industry. Honduras is happy to cope with high European standards in terms of residue limits, also in terms of preparation, but they will price that in, and you saw it on the differential graph that we looked at earlier. Peru will shy away. So to be observed what that means in the coming 2 to 3 years. And then a few lighter, but still as concerning points. Climate change is affecting organic agriculture more than conventional. On the long term, it makes no doubt that organic agriculture is better for the planet. On the medium term, non-organic farmers who resolve to using more chemicals, more pesticides, more herbicides will have an easier time going through phases of climate change deregulations, be it droughts, be it floods. Another fact to take into account. The lack of labor, it's 10 years that we talk about lack of labor, specifically in Central America. Organic agriculture is more labor intensive than non-organic agriculture. The lack of labor is very much one of those topics where there's no clear-cut solution. There's not even a lead of what is going to be happening in the future. You cannot mechanize coffee farming all around the world the way Brazil is. So what will be happening there? Does that mean abandoning farms? Does that mean producing less? Does that mean lowering your quality standards so that you can manually harvest more? The question is there to be discussed together. And then logistics, it's a very recurrent challenge. Of recent, we've all suffered the consequences of and been a bit more alert to what's going on around the world with booking spaces on vessels, securing containers, transshipment delays, etc., etc. That, of course, affects all coffees, but included organic coffees. So that pretty much turns the page now on the origin side. I'm realizing I'm actually taking much longer than I thought, so I'm going to speed up a little bit on the rest, because I see we already have 3 questions in the Q&A, so let's give some time to that. The second section anyways is a little bit smaller, so I will be a bit faster on it. Consumer trends. if you look at the global organic food market, it's up 10 to 20% year on year, depending on the markets, depending on the products. So that's already a fact to start with. It's an amazing growth. It's an amazing growth. If you look at the organic global coffee market, it's planned to reach $21 billion by 2030, just 9 years away from now. That's, again, amazing figure there in terms of net market value. This growth is driven by a demand for healthy living. Our webinar last year had a special focus on two characters we invented for the webinar, Jack and Salima, typical millennials who want to have a healthy living and who have the purchase power to afford a healthy living. So demand for a healthy living, not just in the EU, is what will be driving the growth between now and 2030. And to some very minimal extent, but worth pointing it out, demand for organic coffee used in non-coffee products, bakeries, confectionery, will also be contributing to that growth. That's for the global side of things. Before we look at the EU, organic coffee consumption was up 12% in 2019, representing 3.5% of the total imports in the EU. So that's 2.2 million bags. In Germany, organic is 7% of the total food and beverage market, from 5% in 2019, 2% hike year on year. In France, worth to note, France, which is a market where big retail stores have a lot of importance, as opposed to Germany, where you'll have more spread out medium-sized retail stores. France has a 25% per annum product range growth, meaning if you have 10 organic products in the range this year, next year you'll have 12 and a half, et cetera, et cetera. So it's growing tremendously, and there's a direct correlation between how much a retailer offers in terms of organic products and how much a household will consume. To remain on the French market, and I'm specifically pointing out Germany and France because they are the two drivers of organic growth in the EU. To remain on the French market, a study showed that wealthy families, high-income families, will spend 6% of their grocery shopping on organic products. A medium to low-income family will spend 2 to 3%. So medium to low-income families will still be spending money on organic products, which is a very reassuring factor when it comes to growth. Growth will be driven by high spenders, yes, but will also be supported and accompanied by smaller spenders. All in all, that to say that the per capita consumption remains strong versus other markets, but it's narrowing to those richer families, higher income consumers, and it's soon to be challenged by our friends in Asia, who are also growing their income. Their disposable income is growing faster than the one in the European Union. So a point of attention there to be had on Asian consumption in the coming years. All right. Shifting from consumer to the actual markets, where will these coffees be sold? Mainstream markets, mid-range products, organic used to be a question mark. Do we do it? Do we not do it? Do we put it on the shelves? Will it sell? It's today an entry point rather than a niche. It's today a must-have. So that's been a clear change of trends for private label, but also brands across all types, roast and ground, capsules, et cetera, et cetera. If we look now, not strictly at mainstream, but at higher ends, organic is now a real strong plus point. So you go to a fancy coffee shop, you used to go there because you really wanted quality coffee in your cup. Nowadays, you'll also look at the label, preferably if it's organic. Second option for those consumers will be rainforest, but organic is a strong plus point. Why? Again, because people are more and more aware of what they're consuming and the impact it has on their health. Okay, and then to summarize this slide, retail against out of home has been a topic for the past year and a half, even more now with COVID. But is it still retail versus out of home today and next year and in 5 years? Or is it retail versus online? Get online now. It's retail versus online. We have some customers who have started online sales recently and have seen tremendous booms in sales and reached, thanks to that, markets they would not reach before. Still on the growth aspect, little figures here provided to us by Allied Market Research. On the closer towards growth, no longer talking 2030, but 2026, they expect, and it's worth what it's worth from the eye of a researcher, but they expect the Robusta segment to exhibit the biggest growth per annum, circa to 9%. So let you see which origins that would be, let you see what sort of influence that would have in blends and others. But it's an interesting point to note that from that sort of mass research perspective, Robusta is expected to grow faster than Arabica in organic consumption. By packaging type, non-packaged would exhibit the highest growth, 10%. And by sales type, confirming what we know and we've been told, online sales channel would be exhibiting a fantastic growth there as well. Okay, we are left with one slide. Last, but definitely not the least interesting, roaster conversion. Roaster conversion and also growth expected in what we call the first believers. And no offense to the more recently converted roasters, but there's the first believers and there's the ones undergoing currently conversion towards organic. Well, those roasters who have decided more recently to offer organic in their ranges have high ambitions. They know they will have to find their supply, but they also know they have bargaining power, be it through the volumes they're looking for, be it through the reputation they can bring to a supply chain by joining forces with them. So to keep in mind there, high ambitions and influential power, bargaining power on supply chains. Will the cooperatives and the exporters be loyal to the first believers, Supremo included, of course? Huh? To be seen. Security of repeat sales to 1, 2, 3, 4, or 10 buyers every year, but always the same, is very reassuring for a producer. But will the arrival of new players have an impact on that or not? We shall see. What's for sure is that this organic market, from a uncertainty point to a fast growth, has now become a mature market, or is about on the verge of becoming a mature market. But if the supply does not follow to match what the demand is of a mature market, there will be a crunch. So this goes along with what I was saying earlier and what we believe here at Supremo. It will get worse before it gets better. I did a little simulation there of what would be the needs by 2030 based on a 10% year-on-year growth from the 2.2 million of 2019. Europe will need 5.1 million bags in 2030, so in 9 years from now. Assuming that over the 8-9 coming years, habits of the trade will not have changed, meaning we don't specifically carry organic coffees on the spot, we don't specifically keep stocks, trade stocks will be zero, as simple as that. Roaster stocks, this is a bit of a guess in the air, but we can assume that roasters will keep about 5% of their needs, 250,000 bags kept in roasters facilities. The imports minus the actual demand, 4.9 million. So we use 2.2 million in 2019, we will need 4.9 in 2030. Think back at a few slides ago with the new kids on the block and the new producers, you have 7.2 million bags being produced today. Add 1.5 million, which was Peru, 500,000, Honduras, 500,000, Brazil, 500,000. You're left with 1.45 million bags to find to reach the 10 million bags of production by 2030, which again is just our assumption. 1.45, so that's another 1.5 million bags we have to find, scattered from all the other origins. Seems feasible with a bit of optimism, okay? But we'll need 5 million, the world will produce 10. Today we're buying 30-35% of the world production. Can Europe put itself in a position to be buying half of the world's organic production by 2030 and compete with other markets? Mentioned earlier the lower requirements of the US market. Mentioned earlier the faster consumption growth in Asia. So you'll have on one side an easier market to serve for the suppliers, and on the other, perhaps a better paying market. And we'll be there stuck looking for half the production of the world. That's why there will be a crunch, we believe. And we'll see if we're right or not, but there will be a crunch, which will pump the prices up, which will allow growth, because farmers will see the benefits of growing organically. Farmers will convert. Existing farmers will improve and increase their production, driven strictly by this price increase. This will sort out the problem between supply and demand for 2030 onwards. So that's when we think things will be getting better. All right. So what do we do in that period between now and 2030 when we're dearly looking for safe organic coffee, but we can't find it? Well, we have to tell the final consumer to pay up, but we have to tell them why. We have to price up and make sure they understand why. We have to educate our customers. We have to understand our supply chains and accompany them. It's one thing to understand the challenges of your supplier. It's another to try together with them to find solutions. We can try and convert supply chains. That will be probably easy to incentivize supplier once the diffs start hiking even further, and we can secure long-term supply agreements. The only little point there on long-term supply agreements would be to please consider not putting prices in, but just looking at confirming volumes over a period of time, not exceeding perhaps 3 years, so that we are also making sure our suppliers are comfortable by signing a long-term supply agreement. This ends pretty much this 40-minute webinar. I was slightly excessive there. I see we have some questions. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and take some of those questions. Before I do so, take a 20-second break on my side. I apologize for the coughing all along. Must have been the nerves more than anything else. We end on a little statement that I give you a few minutes to look at. If there's anything more we can do for you, you have questions that I will not be able to answer or questions that pop up to your mind later on, please do write to me or to trade@supremo.be. And then a copy of this webinar will be uploaded on our website in 3 weeks' time, because we simply don't want to make it public too quickly before we share it with our dearest friends. That is it. I will stop sharing the screen. Normally, I think you'll continue seeing me, and I will look at questions and try and reply to my best. So we have one question: organic Kenya, all year round availability, question mark. No, not specifically. Kenya is, first of all, a small crop that tends to ship in a very condensed period of time. It is a hard bean structure, so it preserves itself and it fades much slower than other coffees from around the world. So technically available from the origin year round, no. Available freshly roasted and well kept in warehouses all year round, yes, quite easily. But do keep in mind that Kenya is not there yet. Can I please repeat what is the MRL, maximum residue level in the US? Yes, it is 1 milligram per kilogram, whereas in Europe it is 0.01. And you're welcome. I see that question came from someone who is qualified in the Euro finals of football, so congratulations on that as well. Is there any other substance giving concerns on organic coffee? Excellent question. Yes, there are. more recent, we've been alerted of cases of chlorpyrifos. It's an alert point at Supremo. It's not a substance on which we've created as much knowledge and wealth of information yet as glyphosate. It's also not a substance that has repetitively come up to us. So it has happened a few times, measures were taken. It's of the same nature of glyphosate, basically. Except that chlorpyrifos is in a pesticide, not a herbicide. It is something that Supremo is also partnering with some of you roasters, some other roasters, some other traders, and some producers around the world within the e-coffee initiative that was recently launched, which is an initiative, a multi-stakeholder initiative that aims at eradicating the use of pesticides in the coffee world in the coming decade. So that answers your question there. Yes, there are other substances, but none as bad, as nocive, as negative as glyphosate. How long does it take for a farmer to get organic certification? It takes 3 years. From the moment you request an auditor to certify you for organic, they will tell you very well, stop using any chemicals now. I'll come back in 3 years. That's what is called a conversion period, a period where the land is left to rest, where no chemicals are put on the plantation. All right. What about the next question we have there? Do I think there will be testing for more chemical residues in coffee imported in the EU? It's hard to say. It's very much government-led. It's very much institutional. European food regulations are strict, but for the benefit of the consumer, obviously. So perhaps yes, and we will have to see where it makes sense at the end of the day between protecting consumer health and also protecting supplier activity. So a supplier not exposing him or herself to a pesticide or a herbicide while he or she is growing our favorite cup of coffee. And I see no more question. Yes, there is one more. What about the RFA-UTS merge? I'll be very honest with you. I'm not the best person qualified for that. I know the merge is this close from happening. I know the UTS portal is very nearby shutting down completely. So basically, happy to recommend you some of my dear colleagues to get in touch with. But if you've not yet looked at the implications of this merge on your business, it's time to do so for sure. We have no more questions. This is amazing, by the way, compared to last year. I'm very thankful for all the questions. We have some questions on the chat. Great, thank you. Thank you very much for the comment about the presentation. Glad you liked it. What is our opinion on variance of measured residue levels between different labs, especially comparing analysis standard at origin and in Europe? That's an excellent question. It's actually something that we have recently been going through at Supremo ourselves, with some laboratories not being perfectly calibrated. And basically, our opinion on that at Supremo is that in case of any doubt, retest elsewhere, compare the results. And if you repetitively are not convinced by the results you get by one same specific labo, just stop using them. They're not there. They're there for a reason. They're there to provide you accurate MRL levels, glyphosate levels on a very serious topic. So if they don't have themselves the technology to give you a clear answer, or if the gaps between them and other labos and you've cross-checked and it doesn't make sense, just stop using them. There's many options around. Okay. And that's it. Do we have more questions? In the meantime, we don't have more questions, so we will end it here for today. Thank you very much. My email address is there on the last slide you saw earlier, thomas.delbar@supremo.be or trade@supremo.be. This presentation, a recording of this webinar will be uploaded on our website in 2 to 3 weeks. And it was a pleasure talking to you today. Stay safe, stay well, drink organic coffee, and until next time.